Hi there, my name is Gabriel and welcome back to another EF Core 6 video. In today's video, we'll have a look at how to use configurations to configure our data model and also to override the default assumptions that EF Core can make on your data model. Then we'll have a look at how to use data seeding for our database migrations. And then lastly, we'll have a look at how to use data annotations to do additional configurations on our data model. If you want to follow me throughout this video, you can use the student app application that we've been building since the first video of the series. If you don't have the source code to this application, you can click on the link below this video, which is the associated blog post for this video. And if you scroll down, you will find there's a download starter code button in order to get the latest code for this video. All right, so let's get started. Now, in our DBContext, we have this method, and if it's not there, you can just add it. But you use the OnModelCreating method to kind of configure your data model. All right. And in the previous video, we used this statement over here, which is a Fluent API statement, and we created a many-to-many relationship. Now, as this code is here, there's nothing wrong with it. It will work perfectly. However, as our database model or our data model grows and becomes more complex, the more configurations you will need to add in order to make sure that EF Core doesn't just assume certain things on your data model. And you can add all that configuration to your OnModelCreating method. However, that will create quite a clutter. So a better approach is to take all these configurations and move it into configuration files, and you can have a configuration file per domain class. In order to do that, you can scroll further down, and you will see that there's a interface that you can inherit called the identity type configuration, which is a generic interface. And that interface basically requires you to implement the configure method. Now, this method here is the only method that you need to kind of focus on. But here is where you will go and create your configuration statements. So if we want to use this interface, you need to create a class, and you can call the class whatever you want. Now, I like to add a suffix to my class names, call it configuration, so that I know that that is a configuration class. And I would normally add these configuration classes inside my data layer. So now let's have a look. I'm going to copy this code over here. And I'm going to go to my data layer. I'm going to add a folder just to keep everything nice and neat. And I'm going to call it configuration. Configurations. Then I'm going to go and add a class. And for now, I'm going to call this class course student. Oh, sorry, I'm going to call it course configuration. And then I'll replace this boilerplate code with the code I've copied from the from the blog post. I need to import some namespaces here, and the identity type configuration interface is part of the Microsoft.Entity Framework core namespace. I'm just going to import that. Then, of course, my domain class, I need to import that namespace. And then there's also the injected builder object that you need to also resolve. All right. Now we have our identity type configuration interface implemented or kind of imported. Now we need to go and just make some changes. Now in our student context class, we have this code that we've created before. I'm going to take this code and move it to my course configuration class. If I press the right buttons, okay, there we go. Then if I look at my blog post, the code needs to change slightly. So if I scroll down, this is the version of the code that was added to the DBContext. And this is the version of the code that it needs to be changed to. So as you can see, the only thing I need to do is I need to change this first line, and I don't need to specify the entity type for this particular configuration because the configuration here is already inheriting the context is here, basically the course domain class. So that I can just leave out. And then, of course, I just need to specify that this configuration must be added to the builder, which is basically as easy as doing this. So I'm just going to go and add here builder. And that's it. Once you have done that, you're almost done. The last thing you need to do is you need to tell EF Core to apply that configuration whenever it builds the model. So you essentially need to do this. So you need to go to your OnModelCreating method, and you're just going to go and paste this statement and resolve the namespace. And basically, this namespace or this class here is the class that we just created for our configuration. All right, so what I'll do now is I'm going to quickly go and add all the other configuration classes for all my domain objects. Right, so once I've done that, I don't have to worry about applying them or telling EF Core to use them because this statement over here will automatically import those configurations when my model gets created. All right. Next, what we can do is we can use the configuration files to also seed our data for our database migrations. So if you click on this image, for instance, you can see that we can create some default metadata for our data migration, and also some lookup data, some data that it is going to be used for testing, and also data that might be used for static lookups. In this case, we just want to have some sample data, and every time we create our database, we want to seed it with some default records. All right. So in order to do that, we can just scroll down. We can copy this code, go to our grade configuration, and we can just paste the code here. All right. And we can do the same for teacher. All right. So in scenarios where you have relationships, there's no difference. You basically have to create your parent records, and then you need to go and specify your primary keys. And in this case, we have a many-to-many relationship. So we have student can be linked to multiple courses, and a course can be linked to multiple students. So in our mapping class, we just have the foreign keys listed, and that's it. And that's how easy it is to seed your data. All right, so I've added the source code here. You can just copy and paste if you want to go and play with that. And now once we've done, we can just generate our migration class or migration file. So I'm going to go and add here a new migration and call it seed data. And not to change the default project here, over here to data, and then run it. And then as you can see, our insert statements and basically our seed data will be added to our data migrations file or to our database migration file. All right, now that's very, very useful. Next, we want to have a look and see how we can use data annotations to configure our database or configure our data model as well. In order to do that, we can basically tell EF Core how we want our database tables to be named. So for instance, I can go to my domain models, and in this case it is the course class, and I can go and say I want my database table to be called courses, and the schema of my database or my table must be in DBO, or I can go and specify any other schema. And EF Core will take note of this and apply these configurations whenever it needs to rebuild my data migrations. So if I now go and add another migration called, I'm just going to call it schema. I'm going to add migrations. And firstly, you will see EF Core will have a look and see, okay, do I have the schema? If it doesn't have it, it's going to go and create it. And then it's going to rename my table. In this case, there will be nothing to be renamed because it will be the same, but it's going to try and rename it to courses. And that's about it. Some more settings we can apply. We can, for instance, override some of the default assumptions on our columns. We can say, for instance, in this case, our name column must be required, and it must not be longer than 25 or 255 characters. Just have to import this attribute, add another migration. All right, so if we look at our configuration for this column now, it's going to basically not allow null values, and it's also going to override the default size of my column, which was before the nvarchar max, and it's going to change it now to varchar 255. Now that's quite neat to see how with annotations we can also override or configure our data model. All right, and that's basically how we can configure our data model. So you can see how useful the configuration file is because we can use it to make database configurations, and then also we can use it to seed data. And then of course, the easy part here is the data annotations, how we can use that to also configure our data model. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, leave your questions below this video, and I will catch you in the next video.